What do we know about human stress response? Is it just people are abused and it's learned helplessness? That where you and I and other folks are like, this is an alarm, this is a crisis, do something, where other people's brains and socialization are not hardwired in the same way?
I'm sure you've had dozens of conversations like this with people that you know. People say, I just can't take it anymore. I can't look at the news anymore. I just have to stop. I have to turn off NBC. We were losing our mind. And I understand that. People stress at a certain point actually becomes physically and mentally destructive. There's only so much stress we can take before we actually start having a breakdown, physically and mentally. So there's an element, I think, of just simple self-protection. It's like a circuit breaker. At a certain point, the circuit breaker has to stop the electricity from coming into the house, because if it keeps heating up, the whole house will go on fire. So we all have a mental circuit breaker. It's normal, it's natural for people to take that self-protective step because they also feel helpless. They don't know, what else can I do? I don't have control over it, and I can't let it kill me.
Well, I just talked to Jonathan Lethem, the author, the novelist. You probably read some of his work. And he said something so profound. He said there's a whole industry around Donald Trump that's committed to keeping him in his dream. Fox News, the right-wing news media. And the problem is Trump is dreaming and we're all stuck in it. How do we explain that psychologically?
Well, it's related to something you and I talked about previously, which is this idea of malignant normality that Robert J. Lifton introduced, which is that in a country like Nazi Germany, for example, the crazy views of a leader can eventually become the normal reality of a whole society. It actually happened. We have this term folie à deux in psychiatry, where two people share a psychosis, which actually happens almost never, very rare. But this is like a folie à mille. It's a delusion that millions of people are sharing because it becomes its own reality, and then people imbibe it and then reinforce it in one another. These things actually happen. How in Rwanda did genocide suddenly become one day the norm among people who previously had been living in peace? I think we're discovering that reality is more fungible than we realized. It's more manipulable than we realized. If you've got control of Fox News and you have a certain reference group and you have this president, if you get a certain number of ducks in a row, you can actually create this nightmare fantasy and make it real.
Well, we've talked about this before, and it's one of those things, I'm sure you've had this happen. We make predictions, we write things, and people say we're crazy. Then it comes true, and they never apologize. You never get the email or the phone call. I take that back. I did get an email from someone a month ago saying, I used to think you were crazy. You're right, and I'm sorry. And now what can I do? Because I simply didn't want to believe this. So if we take a look around the country, think about Lifton's work, and you mentioned Rwanda, I have no doubt that those horrible things happening in Trump's concentration camps are far worse than the general public knows. But people sense it, but they don't want to get involved. Kids in those vans left overnight like it's a joke. We have kids being sexually abused. As far as we know, kids dying. We don't know. God knows what's going on out in that desert with those militias. If he is forced to step down or he resigns, because he's already engaging in scripted violence, if he gives the order and the command says he's been deposed, it's a coup, you'll have even more violence. There will be right-wing violence in the streets even more, and more terrorism. There's going to be bombings. And people think I'm crazy, but if Trump says do it, wink, wink, they'll do it.
I don't think you're crazy at all. I think we are heading towards the path of greater violence. I don't think there's any question about it. And also in terms of things where people said we were crazy and now we're right. Of course, 2 years ago, I was comparing him to Hitler. People say, oh, come on, like he's going to build concentration camps? Well, yes, actually, he has built concentration camps. They're not death camps. The definition of a concentration camp is where you are concentrating one element of the population that you consider to be undesirable and therefore need to be segregated and imprisoned in a large camp. In this case, it's undocumented immigrants are being concentrated in these camps. And there was an outcry, right, about the zero tolerance policy that kind of slowed it down. But the original plan was to put hundreds of thousands of people in these camps. And they are, in fact, still pursuing that policy, but not as aggressively as they were. And also, I think part of the plan is you're going to start having experiences where you're going to be eating dinner in a restaurant. You're going to see ICE come into the restaurant and pull someone out of the kitchen screaming, and you're just going to go on and finish your meal. Like, oh yeah, it's the ICE police. They're just dragging people off and putting them in buses and driving them to camp. We're not that far from that. That's what Trump wants to do. If he wins re-election, which is very possible, you are going to see people being dragged off the street and put in camps.
Going back to learned helplessness and the public just being in denial, he's talking about using the insurrection. This should be a huge story in every newspaper. The Insurrection Act to allow the U.S. military to operate across this country, particularly major cities, Democratic-controlled cities, to quote-unquote round up illegal aliens. ICE is already doing that, grabbing people from courts, schools, weddings, their places of employment, waiting for people to walk out of their jobs to grab them. That's already happening. And we always have to mention Stephen Miller because he's the ghoul, and I call him a ghoul, that's behind a lot of this. They basically said we're going to put the quote-unquote illegal immigrants, ship them to cities, and ghettoize them. CNN has that poll. Most Americans, I think the plurality says Trump will win. The public is still as divided as ever. The Mueller report comes out, and his people love him even more. That's a cult. That's a political cult. And what do we do about it?
Here's what I would do about it. We need to flood Democratic congressmen's offices and chain ourselves to their offices and say, basically, arrest us, but we're not leaving until you vote to open an impeachment inquiry. They're so stupid. They're afraid of enraging a few Trump voters or swing voters if they open an impeachment inquiry. We need to make them afraid of us. We're their bosses. They don't work for Nancy Pelosi. They work for us. We elected them. We knocked on doors. We voted for them. We urged people to go to the polls. We reached into our pockets to pay for their campaigns. The Republicans keep winning elections by inflaming their base. 76% of Democrats want impeachment. And they don't just want it. Their hair is on fire. They're having these psychosomatic issues that you're talking about because they can't stand another day of this corrupt lunatic running amok. And what happens? They're doing nothing. They're being weak. Somehow they think by being weak and ineffectual, that's some kind of clever political strategy. No, it's not. Then nobody will respect you.
History is watching. These Democrats, these leaders, are going to have to answer. I don't even worry about the Republicans at this point, to their children, their grandchildren, and future generations if they exist, because we don't know what Trump will do with this calamity, because the world may very well be destroyed, because given his personality and access to nuclear weapons, is attracted to violence. And history is a funny thing, especially crisis. Some people rise to the occasion, and other people, they do nothing. And you can't hide. And I feel like a lot of these folks are hiding. They're cowards.
They are hiding. They are cowards. They don't seem to know how to fight or when to fight. These people, if they're so weak that they're not willing to stand up and defend the Constitution, why do they think anyone's going to believe in them? Why do they think that's going to win them support? They're failing us. We sent them to Washington, and we were so elated at the 2018 election that we finally have these champions in Congress, and now they're becoming a weak, scaredy cat, do-nothing Congress that's afraid of their own shadow. It's appalling. And history will judge them for this. And why are they doing it? What, because they're looking at polls? Because they're following polls that say that the majority of people don't want impeachment? Guess what? The majority of people didn't want impeachment when they started the Nixon impeachment inquiry either. And support for impeachment doubled. Why did it double? Because they had the courage to start an impeachment investigation. And then as the evidence came out, more people came over to their side. So you can't wait for the polls to tell you, Mother May I, it's time to defend the Constitution.
Thinking about Trump, so you got the Mueller report, which should have ended his presidency. You have all this other bad behavior that should have ended his presidency, yet he still stands tall, and I predict he wins in 2020 pretty comfortably. Right now in Trump's mind, based on his public behavior, what is he thinking?
He's thinking he can get away with anything. Every day that goes by, when he first heard about Mueller being hired, he said, this is the end of my fucking presidency. He thought this is curtains. And every day that it's not curtains, he's suddenly realizing, oh my God, I actually can get away with this. So it emboldens him. And that's the other thing that Democrats don't understand. By doing nothing, I understand they're trying to pursue these inquiries, but he is stonewalling them. He's obstructing Congress. And so now they're having to go to the courts for every witness and every document. Then the judge rules in their favor. Then it's appealed. Then the appeals process takes 3 to 4 months. He's holding the ball. He's running out the clock. And every day that goes by that he's not having to pay a consequence or be held accountable for his criminal anti-constitutional behavior is another day that he goes, hey, guess what? I got away with it. Let's try going a little further. So we're not dealing with a static situation. This is a coup in process. It's happening right now. You and I talked about this being a slow-moving coup like a year and a half ago. Well, it's progressed a lot and pretty quickly since you and I last talked about it, and it's still continuing. Barr is talking about investigations against Democrats. Who knows what investigations that Mueller started he's quashing privately. They're moving on. So every day that we don't do anything isn't just a day that we normalize his behavior. It's also a day that he escalates his behavior with no consequences.
You have the Republicans, many of them who know better, but they're just getting what they want out of it. It's purely instrumental in their point. What can I get out of this man? But that escalation, it's like some folks will say, we went along with it at first because of policy and judges and courts. But the reality of it is you're enabling an authoritarian and he will not stop.
No, not at all. And you're right, the enablers are becoming more and more corrupt and also becoming more and more emboldened to do things to support the cause. Not only do they want to use the Justice Department as a shield, they want to use it as a sword. They are going to go after their political enemies using the criminal justice system.
Now, you have the editorial. Number one, what prompted you to write it, and what's the response been like?
You know, we've been saying for, a couple of years that he's mentally unfit and should be removed under the 25th Amendment. That's, of course, not going to happen now because the cabinet is too corrupt. Although what we're discovering is that Rod Rosenstein really did actually seriously raise the issue of invoking the 25th Amendment in the cabinet. What prompted the editorial now was a bizarre meeting between Pelosi and Schumer and Trump, where Trump, supposedly it's on infrastructure, he walks in and says, I'm not going to do it under these circumstances. He basically has a tantrum, literally bangs the table and walks out without having a conversation, and then goes into the Rose Garden and spews a whole bunch of lies and basically says, I'm not going to do my job unless they stop the investigation. You can't have both. But the thing is that what she came out and said is that this is disturbed behavior, that this person was basically acting in a way that was crazy and that maybe he should take a leave of absence, that maybe someone should do an intervention. So at this point, the Democrats are overtly saying that he is so psychologically impaired, so sick, so disturbed, that he's actually incapable of doing his job. Well, I think that's a reason to consider impeachment, along with all the other things, that he's a traitor, that he's corrupt, that he's violating the rule of law, that he's burning the Constitution, and also he's crazy and dangerous and disordered. Certainly adds some urgency.
How do we push people or encourage them, the public or elected officials? What would be the breaking point? Is it that the threat is so great they get over paralysis? I mean, is it a tipping model? How does it work?
I want to start making our Democratic congressmen afraid. I want them to be very afraid of the Democrats. I want them to be afraid of their own voters. I want them to be afraid of their base. I want them to realize that we are going to turn on them like a pack of rabid dogs if they don't do the job we hired them for. They obviously aren't going to pony up on courage. So you know what? Then let's just make them more afraid of us than they are of these mythical swing voters who are somehow going to be rise like evil dead if they dare to open an impeachment inquiry. We have to start making them afraid of losing their job because we'll punish them.
Where do you think we go from here if Trump continues with this behavior and the country continues along this path?
I think what people need to understand is the coup is almost complete. That's why it's so frustrating that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats won't hold the line, because it's really like we're in the end of the fourth quarter and the anti-constitutionalists are in the red zone and we're making a goal line stand, because Congress is the last line of defense. And instead, they're kind of just saying, you know what, just go ahead and walk. We're not going to fight you. We're going to wait until the next game. The new election is almost here. We'll win that. We may be getting to a point where we won't have another free and fair election. I know people don't like to think that's possible, but think about this for a minute. We now know the Russians have not only hacked social media and hacked emails, we now know they have hacked into the voting system. They've done it in Florida. They've done it in North Carolina. VPN technology makes it very easy through remote access to not only enter the system, but to control the entire system and not leave a trace and not leave a signature. I am actually one of these people that believes that Trump did not win the election. I don't mean the popular vote. I don't think he won the Electoral College. I think that it just seems a little too convenient that he just drew an inside straight, just in the few counties in the Midwest that he needed to win, and just won them by across 4 states, a total of 80,000 votes. If the Russians had the polling data and they knew which counties were swing counties and swing states, they wouldn't need to alter that many votes in a close election to give him the win. Now, he has refused to spend any money on election security, even money that's already been allocated. He has shut down the cybersecurity departments within the intelligence community. Not only is he coordinated and colluded with the first attack on the American electoral system, he's now using his power as president to open the door even wider to the next attack. And the next attack won't just be a Facebook and Twitter. I think that